Pam Bondi was the target of mockery, dismissed and challenged to prove her skills on stage. What followed completely reversed the situation, leaving everyone watching in awe. This occurred during a podcast episode that unexpectedly went viral. The guest was Jackson Weller, an indie rock musician from Portland, known for his progressive views and sharp wit. He was in the middle of a story about performing at a fundraiser when the host casually inquired about any encounters with political figures backstage. Jackson chuckled, took a sip of his drink, and leaned into the microphone. "Pam Bondi was at one of those events," he said, smirking. "A nice lady, I suppose, but honestly, she looked at the grand piano as if it were a piece of IKEA furniture. I doubt she could distinguish a musical note from a cup of coffee." The room erupted in laughter. It was the kind of remark that resonated with his usual audience: young, left-leaning, and skeptical of anyone with a political background. Jackson was notorious for these casual jabs, but most people didn't take him too seriously. However, this time it stuck. Clips of that moment spread rapidly across social media. Within hours, the quote was edited, looped, and transformed into memes, accompanied by captions like, "Jackson roasts Pam Bondi with a musical burn," and "Pam, do you even know what a piano is?" Pam didn't respond at the time. In Tampa, Pam was sitting at her kitchen counter when her phone buzzed. Her niece had sent her the clip with a crying laugh emoji. Pam watched it once, then again. She didn't flinch or roll her eyes. She simply sighed, calmly closed the video, and placed her phone face down. Her tea had gone cold, but she didn't delete the clip. Jackson wasn't finished either. A week later, he mentioned her again, this time in an interview with a Seattle-based online magazine. "She's probably smart as a lawyer, sure, but I doubt she has a creative bone in her body," he said. "You can't fake art. Either you feel it, or you don't." That quote made matters worse. It shifted from being a joke to something meaner, more personal. Some fans brushed it off while others felt uncomfortable. A few older fans began commenting things like, "Is this really necessary?" and "Just play music, man." But Jackson either didn't notice or didn't care. He was touring in Florida the following month anyway, and assumed the noise would die down. What he didn't know was that Pam had received a last-minute invitation to a high-profile charity event in Sarasota, a music and arts fundraiser for kids, the very same event where Jackson was scheduled to perform. The lineup was diverse, including local politicians, celebrities, philanthropists, and artists. Pam wasn't planning on speaking or taking the stage at all. She was attending as a quiet donor, someone who preferred to stay in the background and offer support. She hadn't performed publicly in over 15 years, but something was changing. Later that week, she went into her guest room, removed the old sheet covering her upright piano, and ran her fingers over the keys. It was out of tune and stiff from disuse. She smiled to herself and then pulled out her phone. "Hey Dan," she said, calling her old music instructor from law school, who still, tuned pianos. Meanwhile, Jackson continued his press appearances. He joked about Pam again during a radio interview in Clearwater. "Maybe she'll bring her sheet music," he laughed. "Who knows? Maybe she'll surprise us with chopsticks." He didn't know she had been practicing almost every day. He didn't know she had already chosen the piece. He didn't know she had no intention of speaking, only playing. But as the night of the event drew closer, not everyone would be laughing. When the moment finally arrived, Pam Bondi's public image, which had always been tightly controlled, sharp suits, firm statements, camera-ready smiles, was about to be challenged. For years, that's all most people knew of her. Prosecutor, politician, Fox News contributor, a woman who kept things measured, deliberate, focused. But behind that facade was something rarely seen, a completely different rhythm. Before law school, before politics, before the headlines, there was music. Pam grew up in Dunedin, Florida. Her father was the town's fire chief, and her mother taught Sunday school and played piano at church. Every Thursday afternoon, Pam would walk 3 blocks from school to Mrs. Donatelli's house, where an aging Baldwin upright piano sat in the living room, near the scent of lemon polish and old books. She was 8 when she first touched the keys, and 10 when she fell in love with Chopin. Mrs. Donatelli was strict, tapping the edge of the piano bench with a ruler every time Pam slouched or dropped a finger. "Feel the space," she would say. "Don't just press notes. Tell the truth." By 15, Pam was playing sonatas from memory, and at 16, she won second place at the Tampa Bay Youth Music Competition, narrowly missing first after freezing mid-measure during a Debussy piece. That loss stung, and she never forgot the silence in the room when she stood up and walked off stage without finishing. She didn't cry. She simply folded the program into a neat square and kept it in her wallet for years. But life had other plans. Her parents divorced, college came quickly, and the music inside her grew quieter. She pursued criminology, then law, telling herself she'd return to music later, when things calmed down. But they never did. Years passed, and her career took over. Long work days, press briefings, courtrooms, and campaign trails. The piano remained in her guest room, gathering dust beneath old books and framed photos. People stopped asking about her hobbies, assuming she didn't have any. Even her closest colleagues didn't know about the piano. Only one person ever brought it up again, a man named Grant Halberg. Grant was a deputy prosecutor, a few years younger than her with a quiet demeanor. During a particularly difficult case in 2007, the two began working late nights in the office. One night over bad takeout, Grant noticed sheet music in Pam's briefcase. She froze when he pointed it out. "You play?" he asked. "Used to," she replied. "What piece?" he inquired. She hesitated. "Nocturne in C-sharp minor," she said. He blinked, impressed. "That's not beginner stuff." She nodded and returned to her meal. Nothing else was said. A few weeks later, on her birthday, he left a small envelope on her desk. Inside was a single music page, just the opening bars of that nocturne, along with a yellow sticky note that read, "Don't wait forever." He died 5 months later from a brain aneurysm, without warning. She never threw away the note. Years later, when her niece sent her that clip of Jackson Weller joking about her and the piano, Pam didn't just hear a jab, she felt the same type of breathlessness she had felt after walking off stage at 16. That sting, that quiet push. She wasn't angry or embarrassed, she was remembering. By the time the Sarasota charity event arrived, she had practiced every night for nearly 4 weeks. Her hands were stiff at first, but her muscle memory returned quicker than she expected. She kept the sessions private, with low lights and no recordings, just her, the keys, and a promise she hadn't realized she had made to herself all those years ago. The piece she chose wasn't random. It was the same one she never finished playing on stage, Debussy's Clair de Lune. As the date approached, Pam's name began appearing on the guest list for the event, but listed only as a donor, with no public statement or hint of anything unusual. Jackson Weller didn't notice, or if he did, he didn't connect the dots. He had a set list ready, and a few industry friends were flying in. He assumed it would be a fun, easy night with some press, drinks, and applause. Maybe he'd make a few cheeky comments, get some laughs, and show the crowd that charm he was known for. What he didn't realize was that Pam wasn't coming for attention. She was coming for the music. But the stage wouldn't belong to him forever, and when it didn't, things would shift in a way no one anticipated. The Ritz-Carlton Ballroom in Sarasota shimmered under strings of soft light, the kind that made every cocktail dress look tailored and every glass of champagne feel a little fancier. It was a charity event, sure, but also a photo op, a gathering of Florida's well-connected, with silent auctions, catered shrimp towers, and a Steinway grand piano positioned near center stage, like a piece of furniture waiting to be acknowledged. The theme was Art for the Next Generation, raising funds for local school music programs. Pam Bondi arrived just after 7:15 p.m., wearing a black satin dress with simple heels. She didn't bring a +1 or alert the press. She hadn't been on a stage in years and didn't plan to be on one that night either, unless the moment called for it. Across the room, Jackson Weller was already in performance mode, wearing a brown suede jacket and an open-collared shirt, his guitar case leaning against a nearby table. He was deep in conversation with 2 local journalists and a fellow musician from Miami who had opened for him earlier that year. He didn't notice Pam at first. She stayed near the edge of the room, sipping seltzer and chatting with a few attendees she knew from her days in office. No one mentioned the piano, and she didn't bring it up either. Then, somewhere between the third passed tray of mini crab cakes and the opening remarks, Jackson spotted her. He approached her like a man about to score easy points at a press dinner. His voice was loud enough for people nearby to hear. "Well, well," he said, lifting his glass. "The legend herself." Pam turned slowly, her expression unreadable. "Jackson," she said with a polite nod. He grinned. "Glad you made it. Didn't know art fundraisers were your thing." "They are," she replied, "especially when kids benefit." He raised an eyebrow. "Right, music education and all that. Say, are you any closer to telling the difference between a Steinway and a side table?" A few people laughed nervously. Pam just looked at him. "Do you always talk like that at charity events?" He shrugged. "Just keeping it light. Besides, you've got a sense of humor, right?" She paused. "Sometimes." That could have been the end of it, but Jackson, fueled by wine and ego, wasn't finished. He gestured toward the grand piano near the stage. "How about it?" he said, his voice casual but baiting. "Want to prove me wrong? Play something, anything you pick." The room wasn't silent yet, but the energy had shifted. A few heads turned, a photographer stopped mid-frame, and even the woman handling the silent auction paused, at her laptop. Pam glanced at the piano, then back at Jackson. "I don't play for people who want me to fail," she said softly. That stopped him for a second, just long enough for her to add, "But I will play for the kids." Then she walked past him toward the DL stage. The moment was subtle. She didn't storm off or make a scene. She just moved with that same calm rhythm she used in courtrooms, controlled, collected, complete. Jackson stood frozen. He hadn't expected her to say yes, not really. He thought she'd laugh it off or throw a jab back. But now she was at the piano, speaking quietly to the sound technician. The room hushed as people slowly gathered around. A few phones came out, not in a frenzy, but quietly, like people sensing they were about to witness something strange and important. Pam sat at the bench, adjusted it slightly, and placed both hands in her lap. She didn't say a word, not to the crowd, not to Jackson, not to anyone. She looked down at the keys, took a breath, and closed her eyes. Jackson stood near the bar, watching her from a distance. A friend leaned in and whispered, "You might have messed up, man." Jackson didn't answer, but he was starting to feel something he hadn't in years, uncertainty, and the first note hadn't even been played yet. Pam sat still for a moment, her fingers hovering just above the keys. The room had quieted completely now, no small feat for a gathering like this. No one made an announcement, no one had to. It was as if the air itself had shifted. Then she began, soft, barely there. The first notes of Claire de Lune spilled from the Steinway like water finding its shape. At first, people didn't react. It was unexpected, too smooth, too intentional, to be casual. A few thought maybe the audio tech had cued a track, but then they noticed her hands moving, her body gently swaying with each phrase. This wasn't a party trick. This was practiced, patient, and heartbreakingly real. Jackson stood frozen near the back, arms folded, mouth slightly open. He couldn't place the piece at first, but he recognized the tone. Melancholy, rising and falling with grace, and something else. Sorrow, a memory. He wasn't laughing now. Pam's fingers moved effortlessly, fluid but never rushed. Her eyes stayed closed. She wasn't performing. She was somewhere else entirely, somewhere only she could see. People didn't whisper. They just watched and listened. The camera phones that had started coming out were now up in full force. You could hear the faint clicks of photos being taken, but even those sounds felt muted, like the room didn't want to break the spell. And Jackson, he was remembering something too. A night 10 years ago in San Francisco, a club with 20 people, his guitar slipping in his hands because he was so nervous. His fingers kept missing the right chords. He wanted to quit mid-song, but a woman in the back row had started swaying to the music anyway, smiling like she could hear something no one else could. He hadn't felt that exposed in years, not until now. Pam's piece slowed, drifted, and held on one long, aching chord. Then silence. She opened her eyes just a second too long, then closed the lid softly, not dramatically, just done. She stood, gave the faintest nod to the technician, and stepped off the stage. No bow, no grand gesture, just a woman who had something to say, and said it without using her voice. For a full 10 seconds, no one moved. Then came the applause, not forced, not polite. It built from the middle of the room, rising like something boiling over. A few people stood, then more, then nearly everyone. It wasn't about politics. It wasn't about revenge. It was about being proven wrong in the most elegant way possible. Pam didn't smile. She didn't need to. She simply returned to her seat and sipped her seltzer. Jackson didn't approach her, not yet. He stayed at the back, a hand at his chin, watching. His friend whispered again, "You okay?" He blinked. I think I just got humbled." Later, during his set, Jackson got on stage with less swagger than usual. He adjusted his guitar strap, tapped the mic, and said, "I'm gonna change the set list." Some chuckles from the crowd. He didn't smile. "Before I play, Mom, I want to say something," he said. "When I was younger, I used to think I could size people up quick, that I knew who had what talent, depth, heart." He paused. "Turns out I've been pretty arrogant." He looked toward Pam. "And I owe someone an apology." The room went quiet again. Jackson played a stripped-down version of one of his older songs. No effects, no looping pedal, just chords and a voice slightly rough with honesty. And when he finished, the applause was just as real as it had been for her. Pam didn't clap. She listened, and that was enough. But the night wasn't over yet, and the world outside that ballroom was about to find out what really happened inside it. By the next morning, videos of Pam at the piano were spreading across social media. One clip, shaky and filmed from behind a table of wine glasses, had already passed 1 million views. The caption read, "Pam Bondi just silenced a room with Debussy." Twitter was a mess of reactions. Some praised her. "Didn't have Pam Bondi playing Claire de Lune on my 2025 bingo card, but here we are." "Say what you want about her politics, that was beautiful. Pure, raw talent." Others were suspicious, accusing the event of being staged. "No way she just pulled that out of nowhere. PR stunt. What's next, Santa breakdancing?" But the skeptics were drowned out by something deeper. Curiosity, fascination, disbelief that someone so pigeonholed by the media could possess such quiet grace. And Jackson, he hadn't posted anything. No tweets, no stories, no sarcastic follow-up. Instead, he sat in his hotel room in Sarasota with his guitar across his lap and nothing coming out. No lyrics, no progressions, just a feeling in his chest he couldn't name. He kept replaying the moment. Her hands, the weight of each note, the way the room held its breath. It wasn't just that she was good. She was expressive in a way he hadn't seen in years, and she did it without needing a single audience on her side. He thought back to something his old music teacher once told him in Los Angeles. "Real musicians don't play to be understood. They play because they understand something no one else can say out loud." For the first time in years, that actually made sense to him. Meanwhile, Pam stayed quiet. She got home the next day, greeted her dog, watered the plants, and slipped back into routine. She wasn't one for interviews or morning shows. She declined a request from Good Morning America and a podcast offer from NPR. She even ignored a flattering message from a major music publication that wanted to feature her in a story titled "The Secret Virtuoso." She didn't want to be a symbol or a headline. She'd already said what she needed to say, and it was in the music. But she did reply to one email. It was from a 16-year-old girl in Arizona who had watched the video online. She wrote, "I'm not into politics, but I've been scared to sign up for piano class because I'm not very good yet. After watching you, I think I'll try anyway." Pam stared at the message for a long time before typing 2 lines back. "Thank you, and remember, the key is not to be perfect. Just be honest." That night, Jackson did post something. It wasn't flashy, just a photo of a blank notebook, his guitar resting beside it with a caption that read, "Starting over." He lost a few followers who called him soft, and gained a few more who thanked him for showing humility. But the biggest shift wasn't online. It was in him. A few weeks later, he performed at a small theater in Pensacola. Nothing fancy, no band, just him, a stool, and his guitar. Midway through the show, he paused. "I learned something recently," he told the audience. "Sometimes, we're so busy trying to tear down people we disagree with, we forget they're whole human beings. And sometimes they've got more to say than we ever gave them credit for." Then he did something no one expected. He sat at the venue's old upright piano, cracked his knuckles, and played Claire de Lune. Badly, really badly. He stopped after a few bars and laughed. Okay, I'm no Pam," he said, grinning. The audience erupted, and in that moment, something real happened. A wall came down, but not just between two people, between noise and meaning, between mockery and grace. By the end of the week, the clip had reached national outlets. It was picked up by CBS News, Rolling Stone, and even made a brief mention on The Tonight Show. Not because Pam Bondi was trending as a politician, but because someone unexpected had shattered the public's assumptions without saying a single word. The algorithms loved it, so did the people. It wasn't just about music, it was about being wrong loudly and then being corrected quietly, with dignity. One of the most shared comments under the video came from a middle-aged man in Iowa. "I've disagreed with her on almost everything, but that was stunning. I feel small forever thinking she was just a headline." Another from a 22-year-old in Los Angeles. It wasn't about right or left in that moment. It was about seeing someone fully for the first time. That's what stuck. The realization that we all reduce people, especially public figures, to whatever fits our beliefs, a soundbite, a party line, a tweet. But when Pam sat down at that piano, she reminded everyone that real people don't fit in tweets. Even Jackson's fan base, who'd originally laughed along with his piano jokes, turned the conversation around. A thread from one of his longtime listeners read, "Watched Jackson challenge her, thought it'd be funny. But what she did, that wasn't just piano. That was years of something she carried, waiting to be released. We don't know half of what people are made of." Pam's name started trending in a different way, not as a politician, but as a person. A woman who had been underestimated, mocked, and then calmly reminded the world of her depth without ever clapping back. And while she didn't comment publicly, her silence spoke louder than any press release. Jackson, for his part, kept things low-key. No official statement, no interviews. But he did share a second post that week, a photo of an old upright piano, in a small studio room captioned, "Lessons resume Monday." He'd enrolled in private lessons in Gainesville, saying he was tired of pretending he knew it all. Some called it PR cleanup, others saw it for what it was, growth. What no one could deny was that something had shifted, and not just in Jackson or Pam, but in how people talked about them. For a few days, the online world stopped shouting and started listening. Clips from the Sarasota event kept surfacing. Someone uploaded the full 8-minute video of Pam's performance. In it, you could see every detail. The way she took a breath before beginning, the stillness in her hands between movements, the crowd's subtle transformation from amused to moved. A YouTube comment said it best. This wasn't a gotcha moment, it was a moment of grace in a world full of noise. And that's why it resonated, because it wasn't about politics. It wasn't even about talent. It was about how wrong we can be when we assume people are only what we've heard about them. Pam didn't trend for yelling. She didn't trend for tearing anyone down. She trended because she showed up, stayed calm, and did the one thing nobody expected. She spoke through beauty. And beauty, real beauty, doesn't argue. It doesn't defend itself. It just is. Back in Tampa, Pam's piano was tuned, now cleaner, warmer. She played in the evenings again, not for anyone else, just for herself. Sometimes just a scale, sometimes the same 3 bars over and over. No need for applause, no audience required. It had never been about proving anything, but in that moment she had reminded everyone watching of a truth they'd forgotten, that people are always more than the sum of their headlines. But stories like this only last if we carry them forward, and the final lesson hadn't been spoken just yet. It would have been easy to write it off as a fluke, some weird viral moment that came and went like all the others. But this one stuck. It kept getting shared, not just because Pam played beautifully, but because the moment felt honest, and honesty is rare, especially when it shows up unannounced. For a while, it sparked a real conversation online about judgment, about ego, about how easy it is to dismiss someone without ever knowing who they really are. Everyone had their version of the story, but no matter which angle people came from, political, musical, emotional, the takeaway was the same. We assume too much, we listen too little, and we forget that everyone is carrying something they don't talk about. Pam's years at the piano weren't about showing off. They were about process, escape, peace. The fact that she never once brought it up, even when she was mocked on national platforms, wasn't modesty. It was restraint, self-respect, knowing who you are so deeply that you don't need to prove it every time someone throws a stone. On the flip side, Jackson's journey was just as real. He could have doubled down, posted something snarky, kept the joke going. A lot of people in his position would have, but he didn't. He listened, he watched, and when it became clear he'd misjudged someone, he let himself feel that. Not publicly, not perfectly, but clearly. That kind of shift doesn't get millions of views. It doesn't make headlines, but it matters because that's how we change. Quietly, slowly, one layer at a time. Weeks later, Pam got a letter, not an email, a real letter, handwritten in blocky cursive. It was from a middle school music teacher in rural Tennessee. I showed the video to my class. They were stunned, not just by the music, but by what it meant. I asked them afterward what they took from it. One kid said, "She didn't yell, she just played." That's gonna stick with them. Honestly, it stuck with me too. Pam folded the letter neatly and placed it inside a drawer near her piano. She never replied. She didn't need to. That moment in Sarasota was never about fame or redemption. It wasn't a political stunt. It wasn't even about proving someone wrong. It was about showing what it looks like when someone knows exactly who they are and doesn't let noise, mockery, or public opinion shake that foundation. There's a lesson in that for all of us. We live in a time where calling people out has become sport, where assumptions go viral faster than facts, and where it's easier to shout into a void than to pause and wonder what someone's life might actually look like off camera. But that night reminded people of something. We're starving for depth, grace, surprise, humanity. You don't have to like someone to recognize their talent. You don't have to agree with someone to acknowledge their worth. And you don't have to clap back when you can simply let your actions speak louder than your critics. Pam never asked for applause. She just played. And maybe that's the real lesson here. Don't speak unless it adds value. Don't fight unless it matters. And never assume you know someone just because you've seen their name on a screen. Because one day, you might find yourself in a room, thinking you're the one in control, only to watch someone you underestimated sit down at a piano and change the temperature of the entire world around you without raising their voice, without asking for permission, just by being exactly who they are. If this story moved you, take a second to reflect on someone you have written off too quickly. Maybe it's time to see them again with different eyes. And if you're still holding back a part of you, thinking the world won't understand it, maybe it's time to share it anyway. Don't forget to like, subscribe, and share this story with someone who needs it. Real moments like these deserve to be remembered,